The night settles around you like a soft blanket, quieting the edges of the world until only the gentle rhythm of your breathing remains. In this stillness, the mind begins to loosen its grip on the day, drifting toward something deeper, something older than memory. As your thoughts slow, you may notice how the darkness feels almost alive, not in a frightening way, but in a way that reminds you of how vast the universe truly is. For thousands of years, people have looked up at the night sky in moments like this, seeking comfort, guidance, or simply the reassurance that they are part of something larger than themselves. And in those moments of quiet wonder, stories were born. Stories of strange lights, distant visitors, and mysteries that dance just beyond the edge of ordinary understanding. Tonight, you are stepping gently into one of those mysteries, not with urgency or intensity, but with the same calm curiosity that people have carried for generations as they watch the sky. There is something soothing about acknowledging the unknown, about allowing yourself to imagine that the world is more layered and intricate than it first appears. You don't need to believe in anything specific. You don't need to decide what is real or unreal. You only need to listen, to let the story unfold softly around you as you drift further into relaxation. The phenomenon you are about to explore has woven itself into the quiet corners of UFO history for decades. It is a presence both subtle and strange, whispered about in old case files and mentioned cautiously in late-night conversations by pilots, soldiers, researchers, and everyday people. These are the figures often called the men in black, enigmatic visitors who appear after extraordinary events, asking questions and offering warnings, yet leaving behind only confusion and silence. Their existence has never been proven, and yet their stories refuse to fade. They linger because they sit at the crossroads of fear and fascination, secrecy and imagination. As you settle deeper into your resting place, imagine the world as it was in the years when these stories first emerged. Picture long, quiet roads stretching beneath open skies, small towns where news traveled slowly, and communities where people noticed things, unusual lights, sudden shadows, unfamiliar vehicles that seemed out of place. In that slower, quieter world, mysteries had room to breathe. People trusted their senses. And when something strange happened, it stayed with them. It grew in the retelling, shaped not by loud speculation, but by the hushed tones of those trying to make sense of something that didn't fit their understanding. Many of the earliest reports came from people who had just witnessed something extraordinary in the sky. They described lights that moved against the wind, metallic shapes without wings, and silent objects gliding through the night as if ignoring the laws of physics. After such encounters, some witnesses spoke of receiving unexpected visits. Men dressed in dark suits, arriving in unfamiliar cars that looked pristine even on dusty roads. Their voices were calm but strange, their questions rehearsed, their warnings delivered with quiet certainty. And then they would disappear as quickly as they arrived, leaving witnesses unsure whether they had spoken to government agents, imposters, or something else entirely. It is easy now to imagine such stories as exaggerations or misunderstandings. Yet many of the witnesses were people trained to observe details: military officers, police, pilots, scientists. Some were frightened. Others were simply perplexed. Most were reluctant to share their experiences publicly, not wanting to be mocked or dismissed. But when interviewed privately, their descriptions were eerily consistent. Not perfect copies, but close enough to leave researchers wondering if a pattern truly existed. Even skeptics sometimes admitted that the level of detail in these reports felt unusually cohesive for stories separated by distance and time. As you breathe slowly and evenly, you might notice how natural it feels to slip into the perspective of those early witnesses. Imagine the stillness they felt after a strange event, the quiet creaking of their homes, the way the mind replays an encounter over and over, seeking clarity. And then imagine a knock at the door, a soft, deliberate knock that breaks the silence. The world on the other side of that door is familiar yet subtly altered, as if reality itself has shifted by a single degree. This blend of normal and uncanny is what makes the phenomenon so compelling. It is not loud, it is not violent. It is subtle enough to question and strange enough to remember forever. Stories like these have echoed through decades, spreading not through sensational headlines, but through careful conversations among those who felt there was something worth preserving. Researchers combed through files, noting how often witnesses seemed conflicted, wanting to forget the experience, yet unable to ignore the lingering unease. And within this tension, the mystery of the men in black took root. Not as villains, not as heroes, but as symbols of secrecy in a world already full of shadows. As your mind continues to soften and drift, allow yourself to rest in the quiet uncertainty that defines this mystery. The value of the story is not in proving anything, but in exploring how humans respond to the unexplained. In a universe full of possibilities, the unknown can be comforting, a reminder that life still holds wonder, that not every secret has been uncovered, and that sometimes embracing mystery can be as restful as sleep itself. Let these thoughts settle gently around you as you drift further into calmness, allowing the night to hold you while the story begins to unfold. Before modern technology filled the night with satellites and aircraft, people lived beneath skies that felt endless and untouched. For most of human history, the stars were a quiet companion, a map of seasons, and a guide for travelers who moved through landscapes far darker than the cities of today. In those ancient nights, unusual lights or unfamiliar shapes in the sky carried great significance. Some cultures spoke of celestial messengers, while others saw omens or divine signs. These accounts, scattered across centuries, reveal that humanity has always sensed that the heavens might hold visitors or mysteries beyond our understanding. As you relax, you can imagine those older worlds, where people lay on open hillsides or beside campfires, gazing up in wonder at patterns they could not name, quietly recording each strange event in memory or legend. By the 19th century, long before modern UFO culture took shape, reports of mysterious airships began appearing in newspapers across Europe and the United States. These accounts described cigar-shaped craft drifting silently over farmlands, sometimes with beams of light or mechanical structures no one recognized. Though historians often attribute these sightings to natural phenomena or early experimental aviation, the people who witnessed them felt the same mixture of curiosity and unease that witnesses feel today. The human mind tries to create explanations, yet it also remembers when something refuses to fit neatly into familiar categories. Even the early scientists and philosophers of that time kept quiet notes about strange aerial displays, aware that the world still held many secrets. Everything changed as the 20th century approached, and technology advanced more rapidly than ever before. The invention of airplanes opened the skies in new ways. Pilots, accustomed to observing weather patterns and distant horizons, began reporting peculiar objects, lights that circled their aircraft, metallic shapes hovering at impossible altitudes, or movements that defied known physics. These early pilot accounts were calm, professional, and often kept out of public view to avoid ridicule. But among aviation communities, whisper networks formed. Something was being seen out there, something that didn't match any known aircraft. These observations built a foundation for modern UFO interest long before a single official investigation existed. The true turning point arrived in the 1940s, during and immediately after World War II, when the world's tension was balanced on a razor's edge. Pilots from various nations reported sightings of glowing spheres and darting lights that came to be called Foo Fighters, objects that moved with intelligence, tracking aircraft yet never attacking. Military intelligence departments documented these encounters carefully, unsure whether they represented advanced enemy technology or something more unusual. When the war ended, many governments quietly admitted they had no clear explanation. These events set the stage for widespread public interest and concern. People began to sense that the skies were changing, that new forms of movement and presence were appearing in the darkness above them. In 1947, the famous sighting by pilot Kenneth Arnold reignited worldwide fascination. His description of 9 bright objects skipping through the air, like saucers on water, introduced the term flying saucer into everyday language. Newspapers rushed to cover the story, and ordinary citizens began reporting their own sightings. For the first time, UFO phenomena became part of mainstream conversation. Yet with the rise in reports came something else, a new form of silence. Witnesses often described being approached by individuals who seemed oddly calm, oddly knowledgeable, and strongly discouraged them from speaking publicly. Although not yet labeled as men in black, these early post-sighting visits planted seeds for a mystery that would grow deeper in the decades to come. Society at the time was grappling with immense uncertainty. The Cold War loomed, nuclear weapons reshaped global power dynamics, and intelligence agencies grew rapidly in size and influence. In this environment, secrecy became a routine part of daily life. Governments collected information quietly, monitored unusual activities, and sometimes withheld explanations in the name of national security. This atmosphere made people more attentive to unusual events and more suspicious of any attempts to dismiss them. When citizens witnessed something strange, they felt they were intruding on something bigger, something not meant for public understanding. At the same time, scientists were making discoveries that challenged old ideas about the universe. Space exploration was no longer a dream, but an emerging reality. Telescopes revealed planets and moons with surprising features. Mathematical models suggested that life could exist in places far from Earth. All these developments widened the horizon of possibility. If humanity was preparing to step into the cosmos, it seemed reasonable to imagine that others might already be traveling through it. This scientific shift created fertile ground for the UFO mystery to grow, not as fantasy, but as a topic of potential research and legitimate curiosity. As you settle deeper into calmness, imagine yourself in those transformative decades, when humanity was just beginning to look outward with new tools. The night sky felt both familiar and newly mysterious, full of promise and unanswered questions. People watched from their porches, quiet deserts, or rural roadsides, seeing strange lights flicker and move in ways they could not explain. They recorded their experiences in journals or quietly told trusted friends, hoping for understanding. Slowly, patterns emerged, patterns that suggested a phenomenon larger than isolated moments. Something was unfolding across nations and generations. The stage was now set. Society had become aware of the unknown, yet lacked the language or structure to make sense of it. Governments were investigating quietly. Witnesses were feeling both curiosity and fear, and the sky itself seemed full of secrets waiting to be discovered. In this rising tide of wonder and uncertainty, the stories of shadowy visitors would soon begin to take shape, slipping into the narrative like soft footsteps on a quiet road. And from here, the mystery deepened, ready to unfold into encounters that would puzzle researchers and haunt witnesses for decades to come. The earliest stories of these mysterious visitors emerged quietly, almost reluctantly, as though the people who experienced them were unsure how to put their encounters into words. These were not figures from folklore or superstition, nor did they resemble the dramatic agents later portrayed in movies. Instead, the earliest men in black accounts painted a picture of individuals who seemed strangely out of place, too composed, too controlled, and too informed about events that witnesses had told no one else about. As you relax, imagine yourself in those earlier decades, when the world moved more slowly and unexpected visitors stood out in ways they might not today. A knock on the door in the middle of a calm afternoon held weight, and the presence of strangers in a quiet town could stir deep unease. One of the first well-known accounts came from the Maury Island incident in 1947, where a man named Harold Dahl reported seeing strange aircraft over Puget Sound. According to Dahl, soon after he spoke of the event, he was approached by a man dressed entirely in black. This visitor did not arrive with force or threats. Instead, he spoke in a calm, measured voice, yet carried an unnerving understanding of details Dahl had not shared publicly. The man encouraged Dahl to remain silent, advising that speaking too openly about the sighting could bring harm. Dahl later described the encounter as chilling, not because of violence, but because of the visitor's uncanny awareness and emotionless demeanor. Researchers who studied the case noted how Dahl's description would later be echoed by witnesses who had never heard of him. A few years later, another man, Albert Bender, added fuel to the mystery when he became a central figure in early UFO research. Bender ran an enthusiastic amateur investigation group and began collecting detailed reports from witnesses around the country. His work was intense and passionate, but something changed after he reportedly encountered 3 strange men dressed in black suits. According to Bender, they did not behave like ordinary humans. Their movements were stiff, their speech disjointed, and their presence overwhelming, as though they carried an atmosphere of coldness with them. They warned him, again calmly, almost politely, to halt his research. Shortly afterward, Bender shut down his organization without clear explanation, leaving fellow researchers puzzled and unnerved. He later hinted that the truth behind the men in black was far stranger than people suspected, though he provided few details, as if speaking of them too clearly still frightened him. These early testimonies established key characteristics that would define the phenomenon for decades. Men dressed in identical dark suits, driving pristine black vehicles, often appearing within hours or days of a UFO sighting. They displayed behaviors that mirrored human actions, but with slight distortions, too formal, too silent, too synchronized. Witnesses often described their voices as monotone or slightly off, as though they were trying to mimic human speech without fully understanding its rhythm. Some spoke of their skin appearing unusually pale, their eyes too intense or lacking emotion. Others noted a rigid posture, as if their bodies did not move with the natural fluidity of ordinary people. Psychologists reviewing these early accounts suggested that fear, stress, or the shock of witnessing something unexplainable might heighten the sense of strangeness during subsequent interactions. The mind, searching for patterns, can amplify small oddities. Yet even these experts admitted that the consistency among reports was unusual. Different witnesses, unaware of one another's stories, described similar details. The same clothing, the same behaviors, the same calm yet unsettling intimidation. This uniformity puzzled investigators. If the men in black were simply government agents, why were their appearances and behaviors so odd? Why did they often seem uninformed about basic cultural norms, yet intimately aware of hidden details from witnesses' private lives? Other researchers took these consistencies as evidence of a coordinated effort. They argued that these visitors were part of an intelligence operation designed to suppress information about unexplained aerial phenomena. In the tense environment of the Cold War, governments sometimes conducted secret interviews and interventions. But even those familiar with espionage pointed out discrepancies. Real agents made mistakes. Real agents showed emotion. Real agents did not vanish abruptly or appear without traceable vehicles. In contrast, men in black reports often described cars with no license plates, vehicles that made no sound, or visitors who left no footsteps in soft ground. Eyewitnesses frequently described feeling a sudden heaviness or discomfort in the presence of these men, as though the air itself felt thicker. Their visits were short but deeply memorable. Some witnesses said the men asked questions in a scripted manner, while others felt as though their thoughts were being monitored or anticipated. And always the message was the same: forget what you saw. Do not speak of it. Move on with your life. Yet the more people were told to stay silent, the more these stories circulated. Rumors grew within the UFO community, spreading from quiet conversations to detailed case archives. Researchers documented the growing pattern, noticing how men in black encounters often correlated with sightings that were particularly vivid or well supported. It was almost as if someone or something sought to erase the clearest evidence first. As you drift deeper into calmness, imagine these early years when the phenomenon was still forming, when witnesses were unsure whether they had encountered human agents, strange imposters, or beings whose origins were not entirely earthly. Their stories now serve as the foundation of a mystery that continues to grow. And in those softly lit homes and lonely rural roads where these encounters first took place, the legend of the men in black began its long shadowed journey into history. After the earliest encounters, The phenomenon began to intersect with institutions far larger than individual witnesses could ever imagine. Governments were already keeping careful watch on the skies, especially as the Cold War created a world defined by suspicion and secrecy. Military personnel, intelligence agencies, and scientific advisors were tasked with cataloging unusual aerial phenomena, though the public was rarely informed. Declassified documents from programs like Project Blue Book reveal a careful, measured approach. Each report was logged, assessed for potential threats, and often quietly dismissed in public statements, even when internally, analysts admitted that some sightings defied conventional explanation. For witnesses, this discrepancy between what was said officially and what was observed personally added a layer of tension, a subtle, persistent reminder that someone was watching, recording, and evaluating the unknown long before ordinary citizens were aware of it. The Men in Black narrative became entwined with this official silence. Witnesses often described visits by individuals who seemed to arrive at the exact moment when information was most vulnerable, when details of a UFO sighting might be reported publicly or circulated among researchers. These men were frequently described as calm and deliberate, asking questions that hinted at deep knowledge of the witness's personal experience. Yet the interviews were never formal, never acknowledged by any public office. The unsettling combination of authority and secrecy created a sense that these figures were not only observers, but enforcers of silence, whether representing government interests, other agencies, or something entirely unknown. In the post-war period, several agencies produced memos and internal communications that reveal both curiosity and anxiety. The Robertson Panel, convened in 1953 by the CIA, recommended that UFO reports be downplayed to avoid mass hysteria. Documents indicate a subtle acknowledgement. While most cases could be explained as misidentifications, a fraction remained unexplained even after careful analysis. Project Blue Book, operating at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, cataloged thousands of reports, with a majority classified as ordinary phenomena, yet a small percentage remained unidentified, even after rigorous review. These records suggest that the government was aware of patterns and trends that the public could not see, reinforcing a sense of mystery and, in some instances, fear among those who had direct experiences. Eyewitnesses often reported that after sharing their accounts, individuals in formal attire appeared unexpectedly, sometimes the next day or even hours later. These visitors rarely threatened physical harm, but used an unnerving combination of authority and subtle persuasion to convey their instructions. Many witnesses recalled that their questions were answered with vagueness, yet the tone carried unspoken consequences. Researchers who have studied these interactions note that the MIB's presence seems designed to create both confusion and compliance. Witnesses are left questioning their perception of events, while feeling compelled to follow instructions. In some cases, follow-up visits ended the witness's willingness to discuss the incident further, while others found the visits lingering in their minds for decades. Journalists and investigators faced similar experiences. As UFOs gained media attention in the late 1940s and 1950s, reporters who dug too deeply into witness accounts occasionally claimed encounters with strangers who attempted to dissuade them from publishing details. These accounts reinforced the impression that the phenomenon was not merely a collection of isolated anecdotes, but part of a coordinated effort to influence human behavior. The calm, almost clinical approach of these visitors, contrasted with the dramatic and chaotic nature of the original sightings, heightened the sense of unease. It was not fear of violence that lingered, but fear of being closely monitored by forces that remained invisible and unaccountable. At the same time, the government's public stance often contradicted internal documents. While officials reassured the public that no threats existed and that sightings could generally be explained, internal memos frequently expressed genuine concern over unexplained events. Some analyses even reference patterns suggesting intelligent control, rapid changes in velocity, and maneuvers inconsistent with any known aircraft. Historians examining this period note that such contradictions helped fuel the perception that an organized effort, whether by human agencies or something less ordinary, was guiding what information was shared, shaping public perception without offering transparency. For witnesses who later recounted these experiences, the gap between official dismissal and personal observation contributed to a sense of isolation, leaving them uncertain whether they had imagined the events or whether powerful forces were deliberately obscuring the truth. Despite these tensions, the government also engaged in rigorous scientific inquiry, often using radar, photographic evidence, and interviews to track sightings. Yet even in these controlled environments, anomalies persisted. Pilots reported objects appearing on radar that had no physical counterpart visible to the eye, and observers noted movement patterns defying the limitations of contemporary technology. Within this framework, the men in black were sometimes described as having knowledge of the most sensitive incidents, knowledge that even investigators were not fully privy to. It is this intersection of official documentation, investigative rigor, and subtle interference that has allowed the stories to endure, lending the phenomenon a credible weight that purely folkloric explanations struggle to match. As your mind settles into calm awareness, you can imagine these early decades as a world of hidden tension. Ordinary people observed extraordinary phenomena, governments cataloged events in secrecy, and shadowy visitors arrived with measured intention. The line between natural curiosity, bureaucratic oversight, and the unknown grew indistinct, leaving witnesses with the undeniable impression that the world is larger, stranger, and more meticulously observed than we often imagine. Within this quiet uncertainty lies the compelling rhythm of the story, a rhythm that continues to guide those who listen carefully, even decades later, into the heart of mystery without urgency, without alarm, and with the soft, steady calm that allows the imagination to drift and rest. In the quiet hours after an encounter, the human mind often becomes a restless observer of its own thoughts. Witnesses of unusual phenomena frequently describe feeling a lingering sense of disorientation, as though the world around them has shifted ever so slightly. Psychologists suggest that this is not surprising. Extraordinary events activate deep emotional and cognitive networks, forcing the brain to reconcile what it perceives with what it knows. Stress, fatigue, and the sheer novelty of the experience can intensify memory, sometimes exaggerating small details while simultaneously sharpening others. Yet even under these conditions, a remarkable consistency appears across reports of the men in black. People in different places and times describe similar clothing, behaviors, and attitudes, hinting at a pattern that defies simple psychological explanation. The process of memory under stress is subtle and nuanced. In ordinary situations, the brain encodes details efficiently, often filling gaps with assumptions based on experience. During unusual encounters, the mind's encoding system may become hyperalert, noticing minor irregularities that would otherwise go unnoticed, a shadow that lingers too long, a voice that lacks warmth, or movements that are just slightly off. Witnesses often recount these impressions with great vividness, even years later. Some researchers argue that the brain's need to make sense of the inexplicable results in certain motifs emerging repeatedly: black suits, pale skin, monotone speech, and sudden appearances. Whether this consistency reflects an external phenomenon or a natural cognitive pattern, it contributes to the enduring mystery of these encounters. Social pressures further complicate how these experiences are remembered and reported. Witnesses frequently struggle with fear of ridicule or disbelief, which may lead them to question their own perceptions. A pilot who sees an unidentified object performing impossible maneuvers might hesitate to report it officially, worrying about career repercussions or public skepticism. Similarly, someone approached by a shadowy figure after the sighting may feel both relief and fear, unsure if the encounter is real, imagined, or part of a larger plot. These psychological tensions create a fertile ground for doubt, curiosity, and prolonged reflection, allowing the experience to remain vivid in memory while simultaneously eluding concrete verification. Interestingly, researchers studying the men in black phenomenon have noted a recurring emotional pattern among witnesses. Beyond fear, many describe a profound sense of awe and dislocation, a quiet recognition that they have encountered something beyond ordinary understanding. The emotion is subtle, often mingled with confusion, and sometimes with an inexplicable calm, an odd blend that seems counterintuitive to the intense circumstances. Some psychologists theorize that this response reflects an adaptive mechanism, a way for the mind to process experiences that exceed familiar reality without becoming overwhelmed. Others suggest that the emotion may itself be a clue to the phenomenon's nature, a signal that the interaction is designed to leave an impression without overt threat. The role of sleep and fatigue is also significant in shaping perception. Many sightings and subsequent MIB encounters occur late at night or during periods of exhaustion. Sleep deprivation affects attention, memory, and interpretation of sensory input, sometimes enhancing hallucinatory experiences or creating vivid mental overlays on ordinary stimuli. Yet, despite these conditions, the most compelling aspect of Men in Black encounters is the precision of details reported by multiple witnesses. Even when fatigue or low visibility might explain misperceptions, witnesses consistently describe specific behaviors, such as the visitor's measured speech, rigid posture, and peculiar choice of transportation. This level of uniformity continues to intrigue researchers who attempt to disentangle psychological effects from external influences. Another dimension involves the interaction between trauma and memory. Witnesses often experience a mix of excitement and fear, which can be understood as a mild form of trauma response. Psychological studies indicate that emotional arousal enhances memory for central details, while sometimes blurring peripheral aspects. In the case of Men in Black encounters, this may explain why visitors' appearances and behaviors remain vividly encoded while surrounding environmental features fade. The psychological signature of these events, calmly unsettling visitors, precise instructions, implied consequences, appears consistently, even when recollections are years apart. This consistency gives the stories an eerie resonance, blurring the line between subjective experience and an external reality that exists independently of the observer. Social reinforcement plays a subtle yet powerful role in shaping the phenomenon. Witnesses who connect with others sharing similar experiences often find validation, realizing that their perceptions were not isolated or imagined. This shared context reinforces memory and sometimes adds additional layers of detail, creating a network of narratives that overlap without fully converging. Within these networks, patterns emerge organically. The same motifs, the same behavioral traits, and the same unspoken warnings. Researchers studying these patterns suggest that social validation helps preserve the integrity of the stories while maintaining the mystery, allowing the phenomenon to grow both culturally and psychologically. Finally, the Men in Black encounters illuminate a deeper human need to make sense of the unknown. Even as the mind struggles with the limitations of perception, it seeks patterns, meaning, and narrative continuity. Witnesses often report reflecting on their experiences for years, considering whether the encounters were real, symbolic, or part of a broader, incomprehensible design. This ongoing contemplation keeps the phenomenon alive, both in personal memory and in collective discourse. As your own mind settles into quiet awareness, you can imagine the subtle workings of perception and memory, the way extraordinary events imprint themselves, and the delicate interplay between fear, curiosity, and understanding that allows the Men in Black stories to endure, quietly shaping imagination and consciousness across decades. When we consider the Men in Black, the mind naturally searches for explanations, seeking to reconcile the extraordinary with what we know to be real. Over decades, researchers, skeptics, and believers alike have proposed multiple theories, each attempting to account for the strange figures that appear after unusual aerial phenomena. One of the most compelling theories suggests an extraterrestrial origin. According to this perspective, these visitors may not be human at all. Witnesses often describe subtle anomalies in behavior, posture, and speech that defy ordinary human norms, movements that seem slightly mechanical, voices that lack warmth, and a presence that feels both immediate and deliberate. Some theorists speculate that these traits reflect non-human intelligence, attempting to interact with humans without causing panic, carefully calibrating each appearance to observe, warn, or monitor without overt interference. Another school of thought proposes interdimensional or ultra-terrestrial origins. This theory posits that the men in black may inhabit a reality slightly removed from our own, capable of slipping between dimensions at will. In this view, the subtle distortions described by witnesses, vehicles that appear soundless, figures who seem to vanish instantly, are evidence of movement beyond ordinary spatial constraints. Proponents point to the consistency of these reports over decades and across continents as suggestive of a phenomenon not bound by typical human limitations. The interdimensional hypothesis also helps explain why evidence is so elusive. If these entities are partially present in our world, but not entirely, conventional investigative methods may capture only fragments of their existence. Of course, there is also a grounded, skeptical perspective that interprets men in black encounters as cultural folklore intensified by social anxiety. Historians and sociologists note that many early accounts coincided with periods of national tension, the Cold War, the nuclear age, and the rise of government secrecy. In such environments, stories of shadowy agents and mysterious warnings may serve as symbolic representations of the uncertainty and mistrust pervading daily life. Witnesses' experiences, whether consciously or unconsciously, could reflect these anxieties, creating archetypal figures that embody the fear of surveillance, authority, and the unknown. From this perspective, the men in black are less supernatural and more psychological, emerging from the intersection of observation, expectation, and cultural context. Some theorists take a hybrid approach, suggesting that both psychological and external factors may be at play. In this view, the men in black could represent a real external phenomenon that interacts with human perception in highly selective ways, exploiting cognitive tendencies to remain unnoticed or mysterious. Witnesses might perceive certain details vividly while misinterpreting or filling gaps with culturally influenced patterns. Such a combination could account for the uncanny consistency of reports, alongside subtle variations in each individual encounter. The phenomenon thus becomes a complex dance between external reality and the human mind's innate need to structure experience. These theories gain depth when we consider the behavioral patterns reported by witnesses. The men in black rarely threaten physical harm, yet they communicate an unmistakable authority, instructing witnesses to remain silent or to suppress their observations. Some describe a hypnotic calm or an uncanny sense of inevitability surrounding their presence, as if the visitor exists slightly outside normal time or influence. Such traits have fueled speculation that these figures are not ordinary humans, but entities capable of influencing perception, intention, or memory. The subtlety of their methods distinguishes them from other mysterious or paranormal phenomena, leaving observers with a lingering sense of unease rather than immediate terror. Folklorists and cultural historians also emphasize the symbolic resonance of these figures. The men in black embody universal fears, the unseen authority, the intrusion of secrecy, the feeling that knowledge exists just beyond human reach. Their recurring image, identical suits, rigid demeanor, and monochrome presence, mirrors the archetypal shadow found in myths and literature across cultures. In this sense, even if the phenomenon has a mundane explanation, the archetype persists because it satisfies a psychological and cultural need. It allows communities to process uncertainty, codify social anxieties, and explore the limits of human understanding in narrative form. The persistence of men in black stories also raises questions about the role of modern media and popular culture. Over time, films, comics, and television programs have dramatized these figures, blending factual accounts with imaginative interpretation. While some critics argue that popular culture distorts the phenomenon, researchers note that the underlying patterns often remain consistent with historical reports. In fact, the amplification of the archetype in fiction may reinforce collective recognition, making real witnesses more likely to describe encounters in ways that match earlier accounts. This interplay between reality and narrative complicates investigation, but also enriches the cultural significance of the phenomenon. Ultimately, the men in black occupy a liminal space between explanation and mystery. Whether extraterrestrial agents, interdimensional beings, psychological projections, or symbolic archetypes, their presence continues to captivate human imagination. Each theory offers insight into the phenomenon while maintaining the fundamental intrigue. The men in black appear, they communicate, and then they vanish, leaving behind patterns that tease the boundary between the known and the unknowable. As you settle further into calm awareness, you can consider these possibilities with gentle curiosity, allowing the mind to explore multiple explanations without urgency or conclusion. The mystery, in this sense, becomes part of the meditation, a quiet rhythm of wonder that unfolds softly, encouraging both reflection and restful surrender. In recent decades, reports of the men in black have continued, evolving alongside advances in technology and changes in society. Modern witnesses often capture fleeting evidence in ways that were unimaginable to those in the 1940s and 1950s. Security cameras, dash cams, and smartphones have documented strange vehicles, shadowy figures, and brief interactions that align with classic descriptions. Yet even with these tools, the phenomenon remains elusive. Videos are often grainy, images unclear, and encounters brief, preserving the sense of mystery that has defined the men in black from the beginning. The digital age has added both clarity and confusion, providing more material for researchers while simultaneously allowing hoaxes and misinterpretations to flourish. Many contemporary accounts maintain the hallmarks of earlier stories. Witnesses still describe men in black suits, pale faces, and emotionless expressions, appearing suddenly after unexplained sightings or unusual events. Cars are often described as sleek, black, and nondescript, with no identifiable markings. In some cases, witnesses report that these figures seem to know details of the sighting before being told, and their instructions, delivered calmly but firmly, encourage silence or discouragement from sharing information publicly. Modern investigations confirm that these encounters, though less frequent than UFO sightings themselves, continue to follow recognizable patterns, lending an unsettling consistency to a phenomenon that has spanned decades. Digital documentation has introduced a new layer of complexity. Security footage sometimes captures strange vehicles parked near witness homes or along remote roads, with occupants who move unnaturally or vanish quickly. Some videos show figures that appear to adjust their posture or gaze unerringly, aligning with descriptions of early witnesses who noted movements that seemed subtly mechanical. Even when examined carefully, experts often find that these recordings resist conventional explanations. Shadows do not behave as expected, reflections are inconsistent, and timing anomalies appear. Despite technological scrutiny, the evidence remains tantalizingly ambiguous, preserving the sense of otherworldly uncertainty that defines the men in black narrative. Social media has amplified the phenomenon in a different way. Accounts that would once have circulated only among local UFO research groups now reach global audiences instantly. While this increases the visibility of potential encounters, it also introduces skepticism and the possibility of misrepresentation. Analysts working with modern footage often spend hours verifying timestamps, geolocation, and environmental factors, seeking to distinguish genuine anomalies from hoaxes or optical illusions. What remains striking is that even after rigorous analysis, some cases resist explanation, echoing the pattern of early eyewitness reports. Consistency in description, sudden appearances, and a quiet, authoritative presence that leaves witnesses unnerved but unharmed. Researchers studying modern encounters have also noticed psychological parallels to earlier periods. Witnesses often experience the same mix of awe, confusion, and subtle unease, sometimes recalling the event vividly for years. Sleep deprivation, stress, and unexpected stimuli continue to play a role, as many sightings occur at night or during periods of low alertness. Yet the recurrence of precise behavioral traits, direct gaze, measured speech, rigid posture, suggests a phenomenon that transcends individual perception alone. Modern encounters reinforce the impression that the men in black are not entirely products of imagination, but part of a pattern with internal consistency, observable across both decades and continents. In some documented cases, authorities or investigative organizations become indirectly involved. Reports exist of police officers or security personnel noticing figures who appear shortly after unusual events, leaving a lingering sense of authority without overt interaction. Witnesses often describe that these figures do not speak immediately, allowing a moment of stillness before offering concise, sometimes cryptic instructions. Researchers emphasize that the calm demeanor, combined with precise timing, suggests that the men in black are not merely opportunistic. Their appearances are intentional and targeted, aligned with the unfolding of events they seek to monitor. The digital era also allows for comparative analysis across multiple sightings. Patterns emerge more clearly when footage, photographs, and witness testimony from different locations are examined together. Analysts have noted similarities in posture, attire, and timing, as well as the tendency for these figures to appear alone or in small numbers, never interacting overtly with large groups. Some cases even suggest subtle manipulation of perception. Objects appear to move slightly differently around the figure, light behaves unusually, and audio recordings occasionally reveal anomalies that defy immediate explanation. These consistencies echo historical reports, suggesting that the phenomenon maintains its core characteristics despite advances in technology and shifts in social environment. Yet, the presence of modern tools does not demystify the men in black entirely. Even with cameras and sensors, witnesses frequently describe a sense of something beyond ordinary detection. The visitors remain elusive, capable of appearing and disappearing without leaving clear traces. The combination of human observation, digital documentation, and continued ambiguity preserves the quiet tension that defines the phenomenon, allowing it to retain both credibility and mystery. Unlike dramatic or sensationalized depictions, these modern encounters retain subtlety, emphasizing small but significant details that engage both the mind and the imagination. As you let your awareness settle into calm reflection, you can imagine these modern moments unfolding quietly across towns, highways, and isolated areas. Figures appear briefly, vehicles glide into shadows, and witnesses feel an invisible boundary between what is revealed and what remains hidden. The patterns endure, consistent with decades of history, yet still slightly beyond comprehension. In this gentle uncertainty, the men in black maintain their quiet authority, an enduring presence in the margins of human experience, observed but rarely fully understood, inviting curiosity, contemplation, and restful reflection simultaneously. Stories of the men in black have not remained confined to witness reports or government files. Over time, they have seeped into culture, shaping the way societies imagine authority, secrecy, and the unknown. From books and magazines in the 1950s to films and television shows in the 1980s and beyond, these figures became archetypal, representing more than just mysterious visitors. They embodied a universal human fascination with hidden knowledge and unexplained phenomena. The image of the impeccably dressed, pale-faced stranger with a calm but unsettling presence resonated across generations, merging folklore, myth, and modern curiosity into a single, enduring symbol. As you settle deeper into relaxation, you can picture the way these stories moved through cultural consciousness, quietly influencing imagination without ever demanding belief. In literature, men in black narratives first appeared in accounts of UFO research, often dramatized for effect, but rooted in actual witness testimony. Early writers, attempting to catalog the bizarre and inexplicable, amplified certain features: the formal suits, the impassive demeanor, the sudden, unexplained appearances. Over time, these descriptions became more standardized, creating a recognizable image that readers could immediately associate with secrecy and surveillance. Cultural historians note that this standardization allowed the men in black to function as symbols as much as individuals, representing the shadow side of human curiosity, the tension between the desire to know and the fear of discovering what lies beyond comprehension. Film and television amplified this archetype further. Stories about shadowy figures monitoring human behavior, appearing at critical moments or enforcing silence, tapped into deep-seated anxieties about authority and the unknown. While entertainment often introduced humor, action, or science fiction exaggeration, the essential traits of the Men in Black, the subtle intimidation, the calm observation, and the air of omniscience, remained intact. These portrayals did more than entertain. They reflected and reinforced societal notions of secrecy and surveillance, allowing audiences to explore their own fears in a safe, fictionalized context. Even viewers who had never encountered a man in black in real life could feel the underlying tension, the quiet disquiet that these figures evoke. Beyond media, the Men in Black became part of a broader cultural conversation about trust, knowledge, and authority. Historians argue that the enduring fascination with these figures reflects collective anxieties during periods of rapid technological change and political tension. In the post-war era, when governments were consolidating intelligence operations and the public was increasingly aware of unseen forces shaping events, stories of shadowy visitors captured the zeitgeist. The Men in Black, both in accounts and in popular culture, symbolize the hidden layers of society, the people who know more than they reveal, who appear without warning, and whose motives remain opaque. In this way, the phenomenon functions not only as a narrative curiosity, but also as a lens through which societies examine their own structures of power and secrecy. Sociologists also note the role of collective storytelling in preserving the mystery. Accounts of Men in Black encounters are often shared in small groups or through specialized publications, creating a sense of community and validation for witnesses. Over time, these shared narratives contribute to the broader mythos, establishing motifs and expectations that persist across generations. Even as entertainment media dramatizes or reinterprets these stories, the underlying pattern, the sudden arrival, the quiet warning, the carefully measured authority, remains recognizable. This blending of fact, interpretation, and imagination reinforces the cultural significance of the Men in Black, making them both familiar and perpetually enigmatic. Interestingly, the Men in Black also serve as mirrors of societal concerns. Their quiet, authoritative presence evokes questions about privacy, surveillance, and individual autonomy. In an age when technological monitoring has become ubiquitous, the symbolic resonance of an unseen observer who knows more than they reveal remains powerful. Whether through literature, film, or personal accounts, these figures invite reflection on the tension between transparency and secrecy, curiosity and caution, the known and the unknowable. For many, this symbolic dimension is as compelling as the literal accounts themselves, offering a framework for exploring fear and fascination in parallel. The persistence of these stories across decades illustrates their adaptability. The Men in Black have shifted with cultural context. Once rooted in Cold War anxiety and post-war secrecy, they now navigate an era of digital surveillance, viral media, and instant global communication. Yet the essential elements endure: the unsettling calm, the sudden presence, the quiet insistence on silence. In this continuity, the Men in Black remain both timeless and contemporaneous, linking generations of witnesses, storytellers, and audiences in a shared meditation on mystery. As you allow your thoughts to drift gently, imagine the subtle ways these stories have woven themselves into society. Picture a quiet living room in the 1950s, a teenager reading an account in a magazine, or a modern viewer watching a film adaptation late at night. Across these moments, the Men in Black appear consistently, unchanged in essence, guiding attention toward the unseen, the unexplained, and the quietly authoritative. Their influence is pervasive yet gentle, a soft hum beneath the surface of culture, reminding us that mystery does not need to shout to captivate. The Men in Black endure not merely because of the encounters themselves, but because they offer a mirror for humanity's ongoing curiosity, reflecting both our fear of the unknown and our desire to understand it, even as we rest peacefully in the comfort of contemplation. The Men in Black endure in human imagination not only because of the encounters themselves, but because they tap into something deeper within us, a fascination with the unknown, the unseen, and the inexplicable. Across decades, people have pondered why these figures appear, why they behave with calm authority, and why their visits leave such a lasting impression. Even those who have never seen them can feel the resonance of the archetype, a quiet figure at the edge of perception, urging silence, observing, and vanishing. It is this ability to evoke curiosity without immediate threat that allows the phenomenon to endure, gently tugging at the edges of awareness, like a whisper just beyond the ear. Part of what makes the mystery so enduring is the balance it maintains between fear and fascination. The men in black do not terrorize or chase. They observe, question, and then disappear, leaving witnesses with lingering questions rather than definitive answers. Psychologists suggest that such experiences engage a complex emotional response, one that combines alertness, awe, and subtle anxiety. The mind is drawn to pattern recognition, seeking to make sense of behavior that is familiar yet unervingly alien. This delicate tension between understanding and uncertainty keeps stories alive, passed quietly from person to person, generation to generation, each retelling reinforcing the sense that something exists just beyond the boundary of ordinary perception. Researchers have noted that enduring myths often persist because they occupy a space that resists closure. The men in black are not easily explained, nor are they fully disproven. They appear in various locations across different decades, under circumstances that defy straightforward categorization. From the earliest encounters in the 1940s to modern reports captured on digital devices, a pattern emerges. Sudden appearance, calm authority, subtle warning, and disappearance. This consistency, alongside the elusiveness, ensures that the mystery remains both credible and unresolved. It is a phenomenon that invites contemplation rather than resolution, allowing each witness and each listener to engage with it in a personal, reflective way. Culturally, the men in black also endure because they reflect collective anxieties. Across eras, they have embodied the fear of unseen forces, government agencies, surveillance systems, or unknown intelligences that monitor human activity without full disclosure. In this sense, the phenomenon is not just about the visitors themselves, but about the spaces they occupy in our consciousness. They are symbols of secrecy, control, and the limits of human knowledge, quietly reminding us that the world may be larger and stranger than it appears. By embodying these fears without overt violence, they allow exploration of the unknown in a controlled, almost meditative fashion, which may explain why the stories persist in both personal and cultural imagination. The psychological resonance of the men in black is enhanced by their subtlety. Unlike dramatic or sensationalized encounters, they do not seek to shock or overwhelm. Instead, they create an impression through restraint and precision, a measured question, a lingering glance, or a carefully timed departure. Witnesses report feeling a strange mixture of respect and unease, as though they are in the presence of something profoundly knowledgeable yet inscrutable. This emotional complexity deepens the experience, leaving it open-ended and rich for reflection. The mystery is not solved. It is pondered quietly, often for a lifetime, as the mind returns to it in moments of solitude or contemplation. In addition to individual psychological impact, the men in black endure because of their narrative flexibility. They can appear in rural roadsides, urban streets, or isolated deserts, in the 1940s, the 1980s, or the present day. Their characteristics remain consistent enough to be recognizable. Dark suits, pale skin, calm authority, but flexible enough to adapt to changing cultural contexts. This adaptability allows the phenomenon to persist across generations, continually engaging imagination without becoming dated. Whether encountered in personal testimony, historical records, or popular culture, the men in black remain a living symbol, bridging past and present in the shared space of mystery. Witnesses often reflect on the encounters for decades, pondering whether the experience was real, symbolic, or some combination of the two. The endurance of the memory itself becomes part of the phenomenon. Scholars note that extraordinary events that resist simple explanation tend to leave the deepest impressions, not only shaping individual perception, but influencing broader narratives. In this way, the men in black function as both a personal and cultural touchstone, a quiet reminder that the unknown exists not only in the external world, but within the mind, ready to be explored in subtle, contemplative ways. As you allow your awareness to drift into gentle stillness, you can imagine the quiet persistence of these stories across time. Picture the solitary witnesses who told their accounts in hushed voices, the researchers who cataloged patterns across decades, and the cultural echoes that amplified the archetype in books, film, and conversation. Each retelling adds layers of depth, yet the core mystery remains untouched: who they are, why they appear, and what they truly represent. In this calm reflection, you can sense the enduring power of uncertainty, the quiet fascination with the unknown, and the subtle beauty of a mystery that continues to captivate the human mind. The men in black endure not because of fear, but because they embody the infinite curiosity that draws us gently toward the edges of what we know, inviting quiet contemplation and a peaceful surrender to the mystery that surrounds us. As the story of the men in black reaches its quiet conclusion, it becomes clear that their mystery is not defined by the answers we might seek, but by the subtle interplay between perception, imagination, and the unknown. These encounters, stretching across decades and continents, have left an imprint not just on witnesses, but on the collective consciousness. They remind us that the world is far larger and stranger than our daily routines suggest. Even as you lie still, letting calm settle into every part of your body, you can sense the lingering presence of the unknown, a gentle hum at the edges of reality, guiding the imagination without demanding certainty. It is this ambiguity that allows the phenomenon to endure, offering both intrigue and a peaceful, meditative space in which the mind can wander safely. Many witnesses report that the men in black do not confront in ways that provoke immediate fear. Instead, they offer subtle warnings or gentle encouragements to remain silent, conveying authority without aggression. This restrained approach leaves a lasting impression, creating a sense of reverence mixed with unease. Psychologists suggest that these encounters engage deep cognitive and emotional processing, leaving memories vivid yet layered with uncertainty. In a way, the calmness of the visitor mirrors the calm that the witness is encouraged to maintain, a paradoxical harmony between tension and tranquility. The phenomenon thus becomes an exercise in attentive awareness, inviting the mind to observe, reflect, and release simultaneously. The enduring appeal of these stories lies in their capacity to exist in both the real and symbolic worlds. On one hand, they document interactions that challenge ordinary understanding of human and technological capabilities. On the other, they serve as metaphors for the hidden structures of society, the unknown dimensions of human experience, and the limits of perception. In this duality, the men in black occupy a space that is simultaneously concrete and ethereal, grounded in anecdotal and documented encounters, yet hovering at the boundary of imagination. It is this tension between tangible and intangible that makes their stories so compelling and calming, allowing listeners to engage intellectually and emotionally while remaining at ease. Throughout history, these encounters have consistently inspired reflection rather than panic. Witnesses often describe thinking deeply about their experiences for years afterward, attempting to reconcile what they saw with what they know. Some report feeling a quiet reassurance, as if their encounter was a gentle reminder of the broader universe, a signal that there are mysteries beyond comprehension that need not be solved immediately. Others describe lingering curiosity, an ongoing fascination that encourages them to observe the skies, to study patterns, and to consider possibilities that lie beyond ordinary perception. This reflective quality transforms fear into curiosity and anxiety into contemplative calm, making the phenomenon especially suited for quiet evening contemplation or meditative storytelling. Modern investigations continue to explore both historical and contemporary encounters, carefully documenting patterns and anomalies. Researchers note that the men in black often appear immediately after significant sightings, suggesting an intentionality in their movements. Their clothing, vehicles, speech, and demeanor remain strikingly consistent across decades, despite evolving cultural contexts. While some accounts have been embellished or fictionalized over time, the core characteristics persist, providing a through line that lends credibility to the phenomenon. In this sense, the Men in Black are both timeless and present, bridging past, present, and imagination in a way that encourages deep contemplation without the urgency of resolution. Cultural representations have further solidified their place in human consciousness. Literature, television, and film have dramatized encounters while maintaining key features: sudden appearances, calm authority, and an unsettling yet non-violent presence. These portrayals have amplified public awareness while preserving the essential mystery.